Hello, hello, Heather here. This video is about assumptions today, and this is for my Girls Inc. leadership group, Young Women's Leadership Group, and the staff. So thanks for listening again. Assumptions are beliefs that we accept as true without question or proof. So when I talk about assumptions, you could just look at them as your beliefs. And it could be beliefs about anything. We've been making assumptions since the beginning of time. We make them about ourselves, such as assuming that we'll have a ride to school or a ride to work that day. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. We make assumptions about other people. Why do we do this? It's because humans do not like uncertainty. So rather than having the uncertainty, we fill in the blanks with things that we think make sense, but they don't always make sense, or they're not always true. So we're going to talk about the survival brain. So our survival brain tells us to assume that the dark shadow in the doorway is an intruder. And then we react impulsively to protect ourselves as if something is a threat, which sometimes things are threats, but not all the time. So as I said, we make assumptions because we don't like uncertainty. So we're kind of filling in the blanks. When we think of great leaders, though, throughout history, most of them have had a nice amount of curiosity, and that kind of sets them apart and makes them unique and engaging. And in those situations, those leaders have become comfortable with asking questions instead of making assumptions. So good leaders ask instead of assuming. Instead of filling in the blank, you're going to give other people the opportunity to tell you where they're coming from, which is kind of cool. This is really good for relationships. It builds trust, respect, communication, skills, and just allows us to thrive when we ask questions and stay curious. So just real quick, a story here. For many years, I had a cleaning company. So I was cleaning commercial buildings and residential houses. I had this couple, they were in their mid-60s, I would say. George and Kate were their names. And they lived in New Hampshire a few months out of the year. I think they lived in New York most of the year, though. They had a nice house, and I would go there clean every couple of weeks. And they were often home when I was cleaning. They would sometimes get into debates, not full-on arguments, but just debating about different topics. And I never really paid attention too closely to what they were discussing. But I do remember hearing Kate a few times. This really stood out in my mind, and 20-something years later, it still does. But her husband, George, would give his opinion on something, and she would simply ask, "What are you basing that statement on?" And I loved the way that she said it because it was just like a really savvy, smooth way of getting a little more information instead of jumping to defense mode where we're kind of assuming that somebody means a certain something when they say a certain statement. So she would just say, "What are you basing that statement on, George?" And that would kind of open up for them to discuss it a little bit further as adults. And so I've used that throughout my life, the last 20 or so years. Every once in a while, I'll have a debate about something, and I'll just say, "What are you basing that statement on?" So that comes in handy too when someone makes an assumption about us that may not necessarily be true. We can ask them what they're basing that on, and it opens up the door to kind of maybe explain where we're coming from a little bit more clearly. And also listen to them and listening, and then understanding their point of view a little bit better too. So this book, The 4 Agreements, it's one of my favorite books. In the 4 Agreements, one of the agreements is to not make assumptions. This book is by Don Miguel Ruiz. I would highly recommend it to anybody. It's a life-changing book. But I just want to read real quick a little bit of wisdom that he says about making assumptions. So he says, "We have millions of questions that need answers because there are so many things that the reasoning mind cannot explain. It's not important if the answer is correct. Just the answer itself makes us feel safe. This is why we make assumptions. If others tell us something, we make assumptions. If they don't tell us something, we make assumptions to fulfill our need to know and to replace the need to communicate. We make all sorts of assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. We have agreed that it is not safe to ask questions. Turn the page. We have agreed that if people love us, they should know what we want or how we feel. When we believe something, we assume we are right about it, to the point that we will destroy relationships in order to defend our position. The way to keep yourself from making assumptions is to ask questions. I think that's so important. If you can grasp that one thing alone can change the whole course of your life, I promise. So, one more reading here real quick from Bo Lotto. He's a neuroscientist. He wrote the book Deviate, which I love. It's all about perceptions and how we see things and why we see things the way that we do. I geek out over that stuff. He says, seeing differently begins with awareness. It begins with knowing some of the often invisible assumptions or beliefs that maintained our survival in the past, and they may no longer be useful. It begins with understanding that they may in fact be or become bad for you and others, and if not changed, could curtail living. He's basically saying our survival beliefs may become bad for us and other people if we don't change the way that we see things. To truly embody this is to emphasize with what it is to be human. Empathize, not emphasize, empathize. Schools rarely even teach children how to ask questions, and this is for you girls because it's true. Thinking back on my own education, we're not taught the right way to ask questions. So he says schools rarely even teach children how to ask questions, much less what a good question is or the craft of finding it. Questioning our assumptions and beliefs is what provokes revolutions. Genius emerges from simply questioning the right assumption or belief in a powerful, novel way. So parents, if you're watching this, maybe you can explain this to your kids a little bit better and more fully. It's a pretty powerful little statement or excerpt that I just read. So you can get into that discussion, but we want to talk about like how assumptions and perceptions affect leadership. So I'm going to give you a video to check out. A powerful video. It might make you cry, I'm not gonna lie. It's a 4-minute video. After you watch it, it's in a different language too, but it doesn't matter. You're gonna get the message, trust me. After you watch it, if you wanna just talk about like how you feel. Do you feel angry with the teacher for scolding the boy? You could talk about maybe that teacher is at risk for losing his job if the students aren't learning at the rate of other students. You could talk about maybe the only correction that teacher ever knew was his own upbringing or conditioning. Doesn't make it right, but it just shows you how fast we can make assumptions, especially when some emotions are involved. So that's kind of a cool video to watch and talk through. For challenges, to put these into practice, come up with 3 or more examples of how you can ask instead of assuming something. How does this change the outcome? If you want to practice on me, be bold, and you can ask me anything, and I'll answer it as best as I can. The last challenge that you could implement if you would like, or practice, is as a leader, how can you practice asking in order to build trust with the people that you're leading? So that's it for today. And of course, write down your 3 gratitudes. And I hope you have fun with this. Let me know if you have any questions. If you want the full printout, I'll send that to you. And we'll chat about the next 5 topics soon. Okay? Bye.